Good evening, you're watching The Big Question. I'm Sanjana. After years of negotiations and several political changes on both sides, the India-UK Free Trade Agreement is finally ready to be signed. The deal aims to double bilateral trade to $120 billion by 2030, eliminate tariffs on key exports, and open up new investment corridors. But this isn't just about trade. It's also about trust. Two nations choosing to deepen ties at a time when the global order is shifting and China's influence is looming large. This agreement is a strategic signal and a statement of intent in a world increasingly defined by economic diplomacy and regional alliances. To unpack what this deal means for exporters, markets, and India's global positioning, and you, we're joined by a diverse and distinguished panel. I have Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, someone who's tracked India's foreign policy moves closely and sees this as a positive step forward. I have Gaura Sengupta, Chief Economist at IDFC First Bank, offering a very nuanced view of how this deal fits into India's macroeconomic strategy. Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO of FIO, representing the Indian export community who have long awaited clarity on tariff relief and market access. Welcome back to NDTV Profit. And Dr. Rajat Kathuria, Dean at Shiv Nadar University, an economist who brings a cautiously optimistic lens to India's FTAs and their long-term impacts. So good evening to everybody. Thank you so much. And before we kick off, a message to our panelists like we do every evening. Request if you can keep your reactions concise and easy for a wider audience to understand, because we'd love for everybody to be part of this discussion. Ambassador Sajjanhar, let's start with the broader lens before we dive into the numbers. How important is this FTA as a geopolitical signal, especially as India looks to forge closer ties with the West while also counterbalancing China's influence?
Yes, thank you very much, Sanjana, for having me on the show. I think it's a very important deal. You know, it's been in the making for the last, 3+ years. You'd recall that when Boris Johnson had come some years ago, he had said that, by Diwali, we'll have this deal ready. But of course, the circumstances today are very, very different from what they were at that time. But that having been said, I think in the bilateral context, India-UK context, in the overall India-EU context, in terms of geoeconomics, in terms of geopolitics, I think this is a very good deal because it's a very comprehensive package. It is not only trade in goods, trade in services, IPRs, large number of other issues. And what I was surprised to find that it is also includes environment, government procurement, and labor. These are some of the issues that, during my negotiations at the WTO, we did not agree. And for many years after that, we did not agree. But the world is changing. India also needs to change. So I'm very happy that this has happened, and particularly, in continuation of our deals with Australia, with UAE, I2U2, the impending deal with the European Union, and of course, the big bilateral trade agreement. It's not an FTA, but a mini trade deal with the United States. I think it fits in with all this because if India wants to become now a $10 trillion economy and beyond that a $30 trillion economy, we need exports are a very important element, a very important segment of that growth story. So this 99% of our tariffs are going to be duty-free in the United Kingdom. And I think it sends out a message to other partners that we are dealing with that India is serious as far as its external trading regime is concerned. Sanjana.
Right. Thanks so much for that perspective. Gaura Sengupta, let's step back to the macroeconomic lens. The headline goal here is to double trade to $120 billion by 2030. So based on current trends, how realistic is that and what sectors do you think will drive it?
I would stay away from trying to actually question the target. It's good to set targets.
Okay.
Whether we'll be able to achieve it is a combination of a lot of factors. Right now, export The export market is very, very volatile. We've got tariff uncertainty unleashed by the current US regime. We are
Sure.
also facing a much slower global economy and a highly volatile environment. But what's good about the agreement, as the previous panelists mentioned, that almost 99% of Indian exports to the UK will become duty free. India has also reciprocated on majority of its imports from UK, which will be around 90%, which will be duty free. On a net basis, this will benefit India because we have a net trade surplus with the US, and also the fact that this agreement also covers some parts of the services segment, which is also key. This basically ensures or tells you that this is going to be the way forward. In a way, this is an unintended consequence of the Trump trade war that was unleashed by the US. Is the fact that it has given a sort of a momentum to bilateral trade agreements between countries with, let's say, excluding the US, but you are beginning to see that this year, India has been able to reach agreements bilaterally with many other trading partners, though these agreements were under discussion for years. These are not agreements that started the talks in 2025, which has been the case with the trade agreement with the US, but these agreements have been under discussions, under talks for years. And the good part is that you're going to see more such agreements. It also indicates that the tariff barriers is going to be much lower, especially for the merchandise exports. One, obviously, when you have lower import barriers, it also means your domestic industries will have to compete at a level with our external partners because you're not getting the tariff protection. So your companies will be forced to become more efficient, cost effective, better quality. Also, we'll have to move up the value chain.
Sure.
All of this increased competition will spur that movement up the global value chain. So in a way, this is the right way to go. Rather than creating barriers, this is the sort of bilateral agreements that India is trying, especially with, let's say, the EU, which is a much larger trading partner for India. For example, UK is around 3% of our total exports. It is a significant partner, but it's 3% of our exports. So this is basically, I would say, a blueprint of what you can expect, and that what we are actually seeing with India's negotiation with other trading partners. What I would like to get to know is how they're going to manage the agriculture segment. In the case of the UK deal, it's not too much of an issue because the UK accounts for just 2% of our total agriculture exports. So it's not that big a problem. But how they tackle the agricultural exports with other countries, that is yet to be seen. That's one of the sticking points that we are hearing could be between the India and the US deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Definitely a sticking point across the board, and thanks for that very nuanced perspective. Ajay Sahai, you speak to Indian exporters on ground every day. Which sectors do your members expect to benefit the most? Textiles, pharma, gems and jewelry, or are there any new winners in this deal?
In fact, if you look into the profile of India-UK trade, this is dominated by the services, unlike our overall trade, where merchandise sector account for roughly 55%, services 45%. In India-UK trade, services are dominant factor accounting for roughly 58% and goods around 42%. So we are seeing much more growth in exports, and that's why I firmly believe that the target of $120 billion is easily achievable, as in the services it's quite easy to clock the double-digit growth as against the goods exports. But when it comes to the goods exports, probably in the employment-intensive sectors, we will be much gainer, because whether it's footwear, whether it's textile, gems and jewelry, toys, sports goods, marine products, they are contributing a lot in India-UK trade. Though, of course, we are exporting auto component, organic and machinery also. So probably the labor-intensive sectors will gain a lot, but I'm also pinning my hopes on the services, not just on the IT and IT-enabled services, but financial services, professional services like architecture, engineering, as well as the other services. I'm pretty sure that with these kinds of growth in the services, probably the target will be quite easy for India to achieve so far exports are concerned.
Let's bring in Dr. Kathuria and see what he feels about all of this, because coming to the policy and the implementation side, India has signed FTAs in the past, like we just spoke about, with ASEAN, with Japan and more, but many haven't delivered. So what needs to be done differently this time, you would say?
Well, as I think, Sanjana, you hit the nail on the head. It's the execution, it's the implementation of the FTA. And by implementation of an FTA, I don't mean simply an execution of what has been signed into the agreement or will be signed into the agreement, but an execution of an FTA really is the utilization of the FTA. And what we've seen in the past with India, South Korea, India, Japan, India, ASEAN, in the initial stages, the awareness of the existence of the FTA seemed not to be very high, in the sense that exporters and importers were trading, but we were trading outside of the agreement, which means utilization rates of the FTAs were very, very small. And I think that will change now, because this information now is going to be made available to an extent, to a larger extent, and it will be socialized and all. So by implementation, execution, I think one is spreading awareness and getting people to utilize the FTA. Apart from awareness, the other thing that was important in the past was the find of trade facilitation of the exporters and importers, which means, the paperwork, the sort of bureaucracy that existed in order to be able to utilize. And often exporters and importers came back and told us, when I was sort of working intensively in this area, that the compliance requirements were fairly high, and therefore they found it more easy to sort of go to the multilateral route, or to sort of go and trade under the WTO. Of course, I think all that will change, but execution and implementation become important in this context. The other context in which I think this is important, and I think this has been said by the other panelists, is the fact that now India needs FTAs, India needs sort of engagement with the outside world much more than it has ever done in its life as a nation. If you look at the example of China in the 90s, it grew on the back of its export market, but it was much more than that. It became competitive on the back of its export markets. And of course, it attracted FDI. And for India to therefore be able to leverage and to achieve all those targets that it has in mind, $5 trillion economy, FDI targets, foreign exchange targets, etc., it needs to become competitive. And I think the only way India can become competitive, both domestically and outside, is by engaging more with the outside world. No country in the world has become competitive by only relying on its domestic market. You can look at the history of nations, and this is a simple sort of international engagement that brings in competition, that forces companies to become more competitive. Of course, we have to do it in a much more calibrated way, and which is what we've been doing, is this agreement has been a long time in the making. But I think what is important, and why you said that I was cautiously optimistic about this deal, is exactly that, is how much are we going to be able to leverage the agreement. Of course, we'll get more access to UK, we'll get more access to other markets that we are negotiating with, and that's important. I think India needs more access. But I think equally, if not more important, is for India to become more competitive. And I think the only way we can become more competitive is by using these trade agreements with the UK to start with, and then subsequently the EU and the US, etc., to force domestic reform as well. Remember, in the doing business indicators, we are still languishing, and we need to improve. We know that domestic exporters and domestic manufacturers face a lot of problems, face a lot of issues, handicaps. Those need to be addressed. And we've been saying this for 20, 25, 30 years. Why hasn't manufacturing in India picked up in the labor-intensive sectors like China did, like the other countries did? Why hasn't it happened in India? And it needs to happen, because the FTAs will eventually speak to competitiveness. And I think competitiveness will eventually speak to the gravest problem that India confronts today, which is employment, productive employment. So I think giving a boost to labor-intensive manufacturing through an FTAs by pursuing domestic reform like textiles, toys, gems, jewelry, leather exports, etc., to make them more productive, to make them more competitive, and therefore to then generate productive employment in these sectors. And that's the way we should utilize these FTAs. So we should not sort of try and hide ourselves like we've done in the past under a wall of tariff barriers, reduce the tariff barriers, be cautious on standards, labor, competition policy, IPR. We should liberalize, but I think we should liberalize slowly in terms of standards, because we can't harmonize everything with the West immediately. But what we can do is we can reduce tariffs almost immediately, phase in tariff reforms, and then try and harmonize labor standards that Ambassador Sajanhar was talking about, eventually try and make our standards, both in terms of government procurement, in terms of competition policy, in terms of environment, in terms of labor standards, in terms of intellectual property standards. We've often shied away from this, but I think it's time now that we need to also be able to upping some of these standards and using these agreements to try and infuse in some sort of domestic reform in India.
All right, all right. Great point then. I especially like the bit about getting people to utilize the FTA. I think that's something that will definitely speak to everybody watching. I'm going to quickly go across to a ground report by my colleague NDTV's Radhika Iyer. She actually had a chance to speak with Richard Heal, the current chair of the UK-India Business Council, on what this deal means for both countries. So let's quickly listen into that.
It's been a long time in coming. 22, I think, was when the negotiations started, 14 rounds of negotiations. I understand that the treaty has got, or the agreement has got a big thud factor, 2,000 pages. And really, I think it is transformational in relation to the relationship between UK and India. I think that in many ways, people focus on the tariffs, the amount of tariffs that are going to be adjusted, and eventually, both for Indian companies and also UK companies, are going to be eliminated as well. Projections are that £42 billion worth of trade at the moment in goods and services may double by 2040. So very significant impact. And what this means is not just about tariffs, but also about ease of doing business. The fact that customs and regulations are going to be eased. It's going to be easier for people to move backwards and forwards because of the social agreement for temporary people, temporary visas as well. So a lot of things are in this agreement which are going to make a substantial difference to how we interact as business.
Ambassador, I'm going to address the elephant in the room and just come out and say it. From a long-term competitiveness angle, could this FTA push Indian industry to upgrade quality, standards, and scale? Or do you think that we are at risk of being flooded by UK imports?
Well, let me put it this way, exactly what Rajat said, and what you mentioned, I think, Sanjana, at the beginning, that has been our experience. And, whether it's with ASEAN, whether it's with Japan, Korea, basically, we brought down our tariffs, and what we saw was our markets getting flooded. And we were not really able to adequately utilize these agreements. That's why you have this ASEAN-India negotiations going for reform of the India-ASEAN FTA that we've been having. That has not really served us well. Also, as far as the FTA with South Korea. But I think as far as with UK it is concerned, it is. I feel that we have come a long way because we have signed these agreements with the UAE, with Australia, and we have been able to, they have been able to serve us well. And as far as, some of the agricultural sector on quota basis, that we were able to include in our negotiations in our FTA with Australia. So I think we have some experience where some of these FTAs have stood by us, have done us well. The problem, because I was in the ASEAN and I negotiated for the India-ASEAN FTA also, is that when we signed this agreement 2009, 2010, number one, services was not included. Investments were not included in that. It was only goods, and that is, we couldn't get services into that agreement with ASEAN. We were not able to get that and what Mr. Richard Hill was talking about, movement of Indian professionals. We were not able to get that even into the RCEP, and that is why in 2018-19 we had to move out of RCEP. We decided not to go in with that, although we had been negotiating very sincerely from 2012-2013 onwards. Basically because the tariffs in ASEAN countries were already low. So the advantage that we got in terms of signing the FTA was rather minimal, while the ASEAN countries were able to get access to the Indian market in a big way. And also there has been, from China, the Chinese products coming through the ASEAN into India. So I think all that experience has been with us. We are in a much better shape. So coming to your question, are we going to be flooded by the US, by the UK products from there, goods from there? I don't think so. I think we should be able to stand our own because in terms of what the United Kingdom is offering is, what I hear, what I read is in terms of, spirits, liquor, whiskey, gin, cosmetics, in terms of cars, high value, high-end cars. So I think, there is a niche market for those items. But what we will be able to get access both in goods and services, I think that is going to be pretty significant. And as Rajat very correctly said, competitiveness is the name of the game. And if this FTA and the other FTAs can improve our competitiveness, then of course, in terms of manufacturing, we will move up the ladder. In terms of providing good paying jobs and employment, we'll be able to move up the ladder. And that is the real crying need of the hour. Sanjana.
Okay, all right. Ajay Sahai, I think a key concern has been non-tariff barriers and compliance hurdles in the UK market. Does this deal do enough to ease that burden, do you think, for Indian MSMEs?
I personally feel that any country will provide the national treatment, and whatever regulation applies to the domestic industry, we have to follow those standards to get the market access. I'm not expecting any relaxation to come in that way. The good thing is that Indian industry generally is improving the quality. Government is imposing the quality control order, and it is bringing the results also. So I'm pretty sure that so far as the market access is concerned, it's not that we are not exporting to UK, we are already exporting to UK. All that is required is to definitely exponentially increase our exports. And I don't think these kinds of barriers will come into the way. Though, of course, on the larger issues, whether it's an issue of EUDR or CBAM, whether we are talking about agreement with UK or with EU, probably we have to find a way. But I'm pretty sure that we still have time. So far as the EUDR, ESPR regulations are concerned. On the issue of CBAM, as of now, only the steel and aluminum may be impacted to some extent. So I'm not expecting much to happen on that. Let me just quickly touch the issue about the FTAs also. Please look into that. The FTA which is being signed by the government now are with the complementary economies who are on major market. In the past, we have signed FTA with the countries who are very strong in manufacturing, and therefore we ended in a situation where export growth never kept pace with the import growth. But now, whether it's Australia, whether it's UAE, whether it's FTA or with UK, probably we are addressing that concern. And I'm pretty sure that these kinds of deals will provide a great push to India's exports. And in this particular agreement, I'm looking more in accelerating our services exports.
Okay, I'm cognizant that we have only about 3 minutes left. So Gaura, I'm going to quickly get perspective from you. Like we all have been saying, India's services exports, particularly IT, are already doing well in the UK. So do you think now this FTA will tangibly enhance that market access for them, or are we then just reaffirming existing flows?
It will, since we are waiting the details, but since they do facilitate visa applications, movement of people from India to the UK, it will definitely help not just software services, but financial services. I think from the UK, our relationship will be stronger via the financial services. Software services, around 80% is still going to the US. So, and it's very important for our services, which is right now we are generating, overall, India is generating services surplus of $15-16 billion per month post-COVID. Before COVID, we were around $7 billion per month overall. This is so post-COVID, there has been a structural shift on our services, and it's one of the reasons the current account deficit of our country has gone only 0.6% of GDP, which is very, very low. We used to be a more than 2% deficit country, but we have gone below 1%. And that's one of the reasons is services, and the fact that post-COVID, we are seeing not just software, there's also professional services, which has seen a sustained pickup, and that's where this agreement can really leverage. For example, you have your global capability centers, the ease of movement of professionals as well as financial services. I think this is a very, very positive aspect of the agreement. And the fact that for services, it's essential we diversify away from not just concentrated in the US, but also diversify towards other countries. It will make our services exports much more resilient and less linked to, let's say, just the specific performance in one particular country. For example, right now 80% is going to the US. So whenever the US economy starts slowing, we will see a sort of a headwind to our exports. So this sort of diversification, especially in services, is very essential.
All right. Thank you so much to all my panelists, and I'm afraid we've completely run out of time. This deal is a moment of opportunity, but also a test of execution. Tariffs may go down, but expectations will only rise. So as India moves to position itself as a trusted trading partner in a fragmented world, the India-UK FTA is more than a handshake. It's a signal of where we want to go next. Thank you to all of our guests for joining us, and for you joining us every evening. We'll keep tracking this very closely. Thanks for watching.